My name is Lilli Lewis. I'm a singer-songwriter. I've identified as a lot of things in my musical life: producer, composer, among them. But I think my main practice these days, I like to write songs and I like to sing them. I'm from Athens, Georgia, and I grew up like on a dirt road outside of town.
Okay.
And so there was nothing else to do but play piano, and I became addicted to the piano. It was my first best friend, and I played it all day long. And so usually when I write songs, the piano tells me what to say, and then my mouth responds,
Sure.
So it's a conversation.
How was it that you had a piano? There was somebody in your house, or you went to somebody else's house, family member?
Well, my sister was taking piano lessons at her school.
Okay.
And her teacher encouraged our parents to get a piano for her. And so they went out and, got one, and then I never got off of it.
So what did the sister do? I have to ask. Did she stay with it? Did she stick with it?
No, she did not. I think she quit when she was like 6 or 7, and I had already taught myself everything that she had learned. And so my family found me lessons when I was around. They started looking for lessons for me when I was 3, and somebody finally took me when I was 5.
That's so early.
And and they were even like, "That's probably too early, but we'll try her out." But I was so obsessed that they kept me on.
Were you exhibiting indicators to them at such an early age that that's an avenue that they should pursue? Like 3, 4, 5 years old?
I'm going to tell you what I was exhibiting at that age. And I've told this story more than once, but I've never told it on camera. I used to bring my family into the living room. You know how Southern families have the fancy room with the plastic on the furniture or
Sure.
whatever. This room had white carpet and a white couch with plastic on the couch and a cast iron stove.
Beautiful.
And, you had to go through these double doors to get into this room, the little wooden double doors to get into this room. And I would drag my mom, my dad, my sister into that room, sit them down on the couch. I'm 3 years old, right? So this little bitty, I was kind of cute too. I was like this little bit.
Conducting the event.
Just come on in here, da 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 da. And I would stand in the front of that room, and I would be like this. I'd play like this, the music that was playing in my head.
Sure.
And it was very surreal and disturbing for them. They were like, "This child has problems." And they tried to get me out of it by like clapping, good job, Lily." And I'd be like, "I'm not finished yet." So
Wow.
that's when I was exhibiting at 3. Now, nobody in the house really had any interest in music. And so I was an alien in that house. Like,
Sure.
but it was what it was, and I figured out at some point that everybody went to work during the day, during the times when I was going to school, and that if I did not go to school, I could stay home and play piano the whole time they were at work. That's what I came to do.
Why were you, was it because at 3 the piano was not in the house yet? Why were you just...
Yes, because the piano wasn't in the house
Okay.
yet. So the only time I got to play piano at that time was at my dad's church. My dad was a minister.
Okay.
And we had it was an old church, like 150 years old at that point. We had an organ on one side of the church and a rickety piano on the other side of the church. And so after every service, I would go up and like play on the rickety piano, like one note at a time, trying to learn each note.
Sure.
Trying to remember, how does this one go? And that was my only time during the week when I got to play on a piano. So, so I had that was it. But honestly, we got the piano. I think I was 3 when the piano got into the house because my sister had, she was 6. Yes, she finally had a piano at home to practice on. So it was that same year that the piano came in the house. And maybe they got the piano in the house as much for me as for her because they were trying to save me from the weird stuff I was doing. But I would play air piano when I didn't have a piano to play on.
Yeah.
So.
I think that's a new one. I mean, everybody's familiar with air guitar.
Right, exactly.
Not the air piano.
Right. And I was totally unaware of keytars at the time. So,
Yeah.
like...
It makes me wonder if there was anything special to you at that age about being able to go in that room, because typically that wasn't a room children were even allowed in.
Right. And it was a recital. I was giving a recital. Like,
Yeah.
I somehow understood, not that I had ever been to one, but I somehow understood that this was special and we had to go to the special room to do it, you know, and it's stuff like that makes you wonder about past lives and, you know, whatever.
Sure.
Because I have no idea where I got that information, but something in me was like on fire. Like, this is important.
Yeah.
And, you know, kids will be like, come watch me dance or come watch me. I was like, come watch me silently move my fingers in the air.
Well, you know, I will say this. Typically, the narrative is that the child will mimic what they see on TV or they hear on the radio. So they will be lip syncing, or they will put on a little dance for the family in the room. You know, look at me, I can dance like this superstar. But
now I did have
people were doing
TV...
covers at 3, not originals.
Exactly. I did have a TV inspired routine. And that was, I did a mean rendition of the theme song to Dallas.
Okay.
And that was the party, you know, display.
Right.
Like, whenever the company was over, Lilli, do the thing. And I'd be like, dun, 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 dun. Like, I was so into it.
That's awesome. What about church? Were you going to church on Sunday to see your father, and because they had some sort of musical element?
You know, you had to go
Mass.
to church when your dad is the preacher, right?
Sure.
So yeah, and I loved the organ, but I was enthralled with the piano. I don't remember. I remember No, that's not true. I can't remember if we ever actually had both the organ and the piano going at the same time. I don't think we did. I think the other minister's wife was the organist and the piano player, you know, and she would kind of go back and forth.
And that's odd too, because that organ had to be in a 150-year-old church had to be far more impressive visually than a piano.
I think I was taken with the strike and the decay of the piano. The organ, if you press the buttons, they just sustained. They just did what they did. And maybe it was how the piano was used versus how the organ was used, because the organ was used during like prayerful moments, like, you know, maybe getting set up for communion or something.
Somber, quiet. Yeah, sure.
You know, whereas the piano would always be the...
Okay, got you moving.
So maybe that was it. Although I always like had a propensity for like slower music anyway. So I don't know if that adds up. But I know that when I touched the piano, because I never went over to the organ. Now, my mom had a friend named Sybil who had a pipe organ in her basement. And I would go down and play this because I was so fascinated that you had a house-sized instrument in your little house, you know, because the pipes were in the walls. And, you know, and you had to go down a spiral staircase to get to this thing, like a black cast iron staircase to get to this black basement with a organ manual in the basement, and the pipes were in the wall. This was fascinating. This might as well have been sci-fi, as far, you know.
I mean, it looks like sci-fi, honestly, really.
Right. But at church, I never felt compelled to go over to the organ side of the room. I always went to the piano side of the room. I would go up, and like I said, I would play one note at a time. And I think I was studying the strike and the decay, and I would let it decay for as long as possible. It's like I was trying to memorize how each note went, you know, and get to know each note intimately. So weird. Like, even when I think about it now, I think of it as an unusual approach because I've taught students for most of my life since I was about 12 years old. I've taught piano students, and I've never met a single person who had that approach to getting to know the keyboard. But I think it just felt like magic to me, and I think it still does.
Yeah.
And you just, so, it's like, oh, you love what you love, you know?
It resonated with you for whatever reason.
Yeah.
And so your parents start you off on lessons. Where were you at? I guess, how would you describe that? What level of player were you when you began lessons?
About the same level that I am now, in that I was a beginner.
Okay.
And some of the aspects of it were really hard for me, because so when I first started, my teacher focused a lot on like sight reading. And I remember my brain kind of hurt, you know, and I wasn't playing and singing at the same time, but she would just, you know, have a metronome going, and, you know, and I'd have to read notes on a page like in time with the metronome. And I think I was like slightly dyslexic.
Oh.
And so I could feel my brain, like I could
hurts.
literally, right.
Yeah.
You know, and then she had some really neat exercises that helped me get oriented to the keyboard and the organization of how a keyboard is laid out.
Okay.
And I remember being really thankful for that. It's like, oh, this is the F area, this is the C area, and then these are Fs again, and these are Cs again, you know, and just kind of developing a relationship with the whole, you know, this, I mean, you're in a little body and you got this giant thing that you're working with, and you're sitting up on a stool with, like, you know, a stool under your feet so that, like, you know, you don't hurt your body to play this big thing. But I just remember doing it her way. I was very dutiful. I wanted to do a good job, you know.
We had a lot of respect for it, a lot of interest in it.
Yeah,
and kind
absolutely.
of catered to a respect for it, or gave birth to a respect for it.
Right. And I think that like innocent heart and diligent effort is what made her feel like I had, you know, some ability. But in fact, I was not prodigious by any stretch. I had a prodigious ear. Like, I could sight sing very early. I could hear parts very early, you know, and I could replicate like what somebody else was playing pretty easily. But so I had a very good ear. But at the keyboard itself, I was never prodigious by any stretch.
It's a wide spectrum if you think about it. Not only what appeals to people in the beginning sonically, but how they take to it. Because like you're pointing out, you were better at playing by ear than you were by reading sheet music in theory. And
well, no, I was. That was another talent. Me and theory, we were,
Really?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay.
Yep.
All right.
Yeah.
I mistook it. In the beginning, it was something that took a little sorting out, but
it was
you took to it.
anything that was visual, so the visual stuff was hard for me, and visual to physical and hemisphere agreement, that stuff was hard for me. That stuff made me, but anything in like the math of music and the auditory stuff, that stuff came naturally for me.
Wow. Okay. So it was a translation between the two, or the assimilation of the two, but you had each of those in their own.
Yeah.
That's fascinating. Because I was going to bring up like synesthesia, which is something that's amazing.
Yeah.
But I mean, certain people's brains operate in different ways,
Right.
but they still take to the same love for music. you
Right.
know?
Exactly.
And it fosters a pursuit no matter what, so you can't really knock it. you know what I
Exactly.
mean?
You know, there are a lot of ways of getting at things, and I think that when there's love that's there, and I know that's a generic word, but I don't know what other word to use. I think that when there's love there, no matter what path you take, you'll find, as you develop that intimate relationship with it, you will find something beautiful.
Yeah.
You will find something that speaks. you know, no matter what road you take to get there.
Sure. Yeah, like you and I were speaking earlier about, I guess, being into something for the right reasons. Something that is kind of forced, there's a word for it, it's not coming to mind, but something that's kind of forced produces a final product that does not seem genuine. And it doesn't have to be in plain English that it's not genuine. People pick up on that. And you can try as you may to have the same successes as this other person, but this other person has a genuine love for what they're doing, and that's what their music is born out of, and you won't be able to fake that.
And honestly, you can generate, even if you have the right love or the right orientation, you can actually create that for yourself. Like, you can lose yourself to your ambition about like being better or doing the right thing, and you can lose, your intrinsic voice in pursuit of, somebody else's intrinsic voice,
Yeah.
And so that can be that there's so many different paths to that as well, So I feel like being a sincere practitioner is a bit of a fine line. For some people, like there are some people who they're born to it, they got no choice, it's the only language they can speak,
Sure.
And for those, it's just like more power to you. Like they sometimes, get the riches, they sometimes die in poverty, and makes no difference to them because just who they are. I know for myself personally, given that I had so many struggles in my brain, and a lot of that came from early childhood trauma and just losing a firm sense of hemisphere agreement. So I was very clumsy, for example. That was one manifestation of it. And then another was that when both sides of the brain, I had a overly developed right hemisphere, left hemisphere not as much. And so my logic side, which is interesting because I was a math person, so I understood logic to an extent, but it was like getting those two sides to work together seamlessly caused me nausea in my body.
Yeah.
So, and if my emotions ever got too high, whatever tightrope I was walking, everything would just fall apart.
Yeah.
And so I knew I had a lot of, now they would call it neurodiversity. Back then they just called it problems.
Real generic.
Right? So I knew, and I was very high achieving. And so nobody else knew all that I was up against,
Right.
But I knew I was up against enough that I always felt in over my head. And so I tried to compensate for that by, either trying to imitate what other people were doing or by practicing more and more and more and more and more. And I think the fact that it was a compensation instead of an allowance, like allowing space for my special way of processing.
Sure.
I think that changed my path in terms of finding my own voice. But I did find my way. I do think so.
Yeah.
I do think so. But like we said, there's lots of ways to get there.
Yeah.
It's
interesting because some of the building blocks that people pick up along the way, usually at a young age, with reference to music or let's say learning theory, for instance. It's not a necessity, but it will help you. It will help you later on in life. But it instills a lot of parameters early on. And those can be a divergent of creativity because you're starting off with a bunch of rules And
Right.
honestly, art and the expression of art shouldn't have any parameters.
And I will
It kind of
admit,
sullies it a bit, you know?
right. And even though I was really good at theory, I was not attaching theory to my music. Like, I'd be like, yeah, I know these rules. I know how to spell all this stuff. I know how to recognize all this stuff when I hear it. When, came to counterpoint, yeah, all that kind of stuff so I was exposed to kind of college level theory around by the time I was like 14 or 15 because of this high school that I went to. And, but my whole life, like they would have like theory bees instead of spelling bees, and I would always nail it. Like I was always like,
Interesting.
So that kind of stuff for some reason came very naturally to me, but I wasn't making the connection. I actually didn't treat it like rules. I was just like, oh, these are just like times tables, and I do know that 2 times 2 equals 4.
It's a means of communication. I maybe chose the wrong word.
It became that in when I left classical music.
Okay.
So like when I left the realm of classical music, I needed a shorthand to communicate what I wanted played to the other musicians, and if we had that shared language, then certainly that saved a lot of time. Yeah. And unfortunately, I wrote pieces that were not always easily analyzable, and my bass player in my band right now, he's a very accomplished composer, kind of bigwig, studied with the fanciest people, and he says he stays in my band because like there are so many different ways to interpret some of my changes, and it like, and we have these debates over things. Well, is that or is that is it and I love that I'm able to attract real musicians because I dance with this stuff and I have a language for it. But I will say that at that time, when my studies were primarily classical, I didn't start really applying theory to the score that I was working on probably until, college level. And then by the time I finished, college, where piano was my primary, I was double majoring in piano and voice. But I got in on piano scholarships.
Sorry, piano and what?
Voice.
Voice, okay.
Yeah. But I was paying for everything on piano scholarships. In my, was it sophomore year, perhaps? Maybe I think it was my sophomore year. My father passed, and there was a lot of unfinished business and a lot of grieving. Mm-hmm. And during that time, I started writing my own songs. I had composed when I was younger, mm-hmm. and then for, however, 15 some odd years, I had surrendered over to these scores of other people's music, and then I randomly started writing songs. I wrote some art songs as well, but then I was writing in a language that I hadn't learned in school, because in school I was only learning the classical language, and this was something else, and I didn't have any mirrors for it around me at all. I didn't know what to call it. It just sounded good to me. It, you know what I mean? Like I was just making music that made sense to me, and after I realized that I wanted to continue writing songs, I actually bought a guitar because I had no talent at it whatsoever. And so I knew I couldn't use rules to write on it.
You had to break free of that mold, right?
Exactly.
That's unbelievable. Yeah. When you were, so I get that people will, try to play some of the pieces of their favorite bands or interests because it helps them understand a myriad of things, one of which is song arrangement. Mm. So you learning in the language of classical for so long kind of impeded you when you wanted to step outside of that genre, because as far as song arrangement, and I'm sure many other things, you hadn't really been shown the ropes, so to speak.
Oh Lord, no, absolutely not. And Lord, was it awkward. And like to this day, I'd probably write a lot of stuff with like that's classically informed.
Sure.
Because that music was infinitely beautiful to me, and I didn't see why. And I've messed around. Was when I was just starting out, I saw an interview with Tori Amos, who is like, yeah, so pop songs are the new art songs, and I don't see why pop songs can't be just as dense and interesting as any other art song, you know? It's just, this is the 20th century, now 21st century art song. And so when I first started writing songs, I was like, yeah, I'm going to write 21st century art songs. Mm-hmm. I'm going to like find a new pop language, you know, and not necessarily rest on the laurels of the inherited pop language. And I'm going to...
I suppose, but you know, the very nature of the word pop, it's what's popular at the time. Is it a genre necessarily?
But pop, I mean, it also borrows. Has always
it's
evolved.
A meeting ground. Well, it's a meeting ground for genres.
But here's my thing. Pop, and there are certainly different definitions of pop, right? Mm-hmm. So at that time, my definition of pop was anything that could be played somewhere other than a college campus and a concert hall, like, you know, like a classical concert hall. So, you know,
say that again, please.
Well, what I mean is, like, I meant non-academic music. That's really what I meant. At this point, okay. I had the art music world, which I considered academic, and I had the pop music world, which was everything else.
So according to your definition, where does avant-garde fall?
Avant-garde is largely academic. Like, but I mean, it depends on...
It kind of breaks rules, though. I mean...
Well, but to me, a lot of times that's what makes it academic, because the academic environment at that time, like, everybody was trying to break rules. Like, everybody was like, here are all the rules. Now let's break them all. Let's see what works. So it was a realm where people had big ears and were really willing to receive anything. Mm-hmm. And they got bored when everything was too structured.
Okay.
Because at this point, they'd done so many acrobatics that their ear was so expanded that things being too formulaic sort of made them check out a little bit.
Yeah.
And to me, the realm of pop music was a bunch of stuff that was either formulaic but had that extra something that you don't quite understand why it works, but it works. But like, that's the whole thing, is like, you don't understand why it works, but it works. Like, that's the fancy pop music that makes me want to check in and be like, so it could be something like, what's my most recent obsession? Oh man, am I going to be able to remember it right now? I think it's, oh man. I remember that it was like a 50 song that I grew up hearing my whole life, a certain version. And I remember recently coming across the original, and same song, fairly same arrangement, performed differently. Mm-hmm. And I was like, holy moly, this slaps! And
it's better.
Oh my God. And suddenly, I'm like, this thing that used to be wallpaper is alive.
Sure.
And I don't know exactly why, and I'm busy trying to figure out why. And it's like anything that kind of like reaches the zeitgeist in that way, and it puts you in that sort of like, it's more of a like organic response as opposed to an opinion. So avant-garde, a lot of times, you know, you would have, I think the people, though it breaks a lot of rules, the people who are most likely to embrace avant-garde music with wide open arms is a fairly elite audience. whether they're classically trained or not, it's still like they can be a little bit of elitist in all of their like anarchy, you know?
Yeah, I mean, I picture that as the forum for early adopters, right? It's somebody that is more open to experimentation, let's say freeform jazz. It's somebody that's more open to this, and I think avant-garde is a bit of that. I'm not like learned in the definition per se. It's just the impression that it gives me.
Right.
And I feel like it's perhaps a stripped down experimental version that, like you're saying, an elite crowd, or maybe in my terms, an early adopter crowd is going to pay enough attention to or give credit to in order to entertain whether or not it's something we should move forward with. And then from there becomes the followers and the people that maybe contribute to that vein.
But I think that whole vein has its own culture. And I will say this, I think the reason I associate that with more academic listeners is because a lot of 20th and 21st century music, even if it's composing, they're organizing the sounds, but it has an avant-garde feel. And so, like, people who had studied that stuff were well versed in that feel, and they were well versed in being willing to be disoriented musically and just like surrender, right?
Sure. And
I feel like in pop music, disorientation is almost it almost kills it. The other thing, now look, I've played in a lot of avant-garde ensembles. Like, I actually love free jazz. I love, like, just, even if it's not jazz, like, just free performance. Like, it's something that I love. But I also think that my fundamental, like, as getting to be an old lady, and having a little bit more experience in the non-academic world, I'm like, the thing about avant-garde is it doesn't matter whether or not it works.
Sure.
And in pop music, it must work.
Well, pop music to me, or any pop art to me, it has to start off with a largely recognizable base. Like, we have our starting point in pop has to be, it is largely recognizable. Now, where you move from there might help to further define it. But in order to be in the realm of pop art, I would think it has to start with something that many people recognize, because in that it becomes popular to an extent. It justifies its existence in the pop world.
I think on one side of the spectrum, you're absolutely right. Mm-hmm. And when I hear these words from you, what comes up for me is like the stuff that is familiar to people, right away familiar, are like chord changes from several hundred years ago that we've just been reiterating, A
lot of it is, yeah.
And it's a specific set of chord changes that got codified at kind of a specific time. Mm-hmm. And in the Western world, we were like, yeah, we like that, and we rolled with it. Mm-hmm. But if I go back to that time and the music that informed that time, stuff was weird. Stuff was really, really, really weird.
Yeah.
And the weird stuff became, like, the weird stuff that was popular then became less popular when this sound came up. And then we ride this sound for a few hundred years.
Sure.
And eventually some weird stuff becomes, like, for example, I call metal a pop idiom because a lot of people like it. Mm-hmm. A lot of people made a lot of money off of metal. Well, we had gone several hundred years actively deleting tritones from every popular song. Like, no, don't do that. No, it's bad. And then metal comes along and just like, let's exploit this thing that everybody said was bad.
Sure.
And you found out that it spoke to a lot of people, and it became a part of a popular vernacular that had been deleted for several hundred years. So that's all I'm saying. I'm saying that we've got one thing that's just like, yeah, this is common practice. It's familiar. It sets people at ease. You have a good shot of this becoming, this feeling popular. And then you also have, at the same time, because musicians never just leave things alone, you have people who are like, let me go get that weird thing and see if I can make that popular.
Well, look at
sometimes it works.
Of course, look at the romance, but if you want to call it that, I'm just being funny. But look at the romance between punk music and metal music, and the child they have is thrash music. They both sides were really heavy metal was trying to further influence and not capitalize, but change the face of rock and roll.
Right.
And punk music was doing the same thing.
Right.
Maybe more fueled by societal issues or whatever. They were just anti everything.
But truthfully, punk music was actually folk music, just played louder.
It's an expressive music to a degree that is almost hard to believe. And both were sonically trying to do that in their own veins.
Yeah, exactly.
And like you're saying, they're capitalizing or it's born out of earlier language that at one time was societally normal, you know, which is crazy. We could go down the wormhole forever on this. I want to get back to your life though. Where did you go from elementary and middle and high school? Did you pursue music throughout that whole period of time with no stops in between? Did you ever take a break from it?
Well, not really. We did have breaks and maybe we couldn't afford the lessons for a while. And then I think when I was around 12, I started working so I could pay for my own lessons. And by the time I got to high school, I went to boarding school for a while and they gave me a scholarship to take lessons. But then when I had to come home from boarding school, I worked. I had to get myself to the lessons. So I took my cabs to, I had, at that point, by the time I was in high school, my mom really didn't want to have anything to do with me and my music thing. And my dad, we weren't in my dad's house anymore. So, there was a point at which I was taking lessons at the university and sleeping. This is in high school. I was sleeping under the pianos at the university so that I could, because I would be practicing at the university and there was no way to get transportation home. So I would just sleep in the practice room, get up in the morning, do some more practicing before I would hop on a bus to get back to my little public high school,
What was the occasion? How did you have the occasion to practice at the university when you were still a high school student?
Because I was joint enrolled. I was taking classes at the university and at the public high school. And
the university classes were strictly music classes?
Yeah.
In public high school, you were still pursuing your diploma?
Yeah, I guess for the most part. But I wasn't going to the university for music. At that point, but I do think, if I'm not mistaken, I do think I only took music classes. I may have taken a chemistry class or something like that. It was just it was a program that they had where if you had enough credits and you tested into, college level stuff, then you could take the college level classes. And I had, I had college level math credits, college level chemistry credits and stuff like that. And so they allowed me into this joint enrollment program. I think kind of halfway through, actually, here's what really happened. Came home for a year, then went back to boarding school for part of the semester. My dad got leukemia and I finished my senior year in high school back at home. And I tried to go back to the public school when I got back home. And I really just wanted to practice piano. So I wrote a letter to admissions and I was like, these are my credits and this is what I do. And I already have been joint enrolled with y'all. Can y'all just take me on without me finishing high school? And they did. So wow. I started college without finishing high school and getting a GED. I never even got a GED.
Really?
Yeah.
That's a crazy turn of events. What high school, what college, please?
So at home, my high school was Clark Central High School in Athens, Georgia. And the boarding school I went to was in New England. It was called Phillips Academy in Andover, Massachusetts.
All right. And then college?
College was UGA, University of Georgia.
Okay.
Yeah.
And how long does that go on for, this joint enrollment?
Well, the joint enrollment was like my junior year in high school and then part of my senior year. Like a small little sliver of senior year. And so I think I started college proper when I was 16 or 17. And, but I was there for, I don't know, 5 or 6 years because after my dad died, I took a year off and honestly, I had, I kind of had a mental break. I had a nervous breakdown.
Yeah.
Just a lot of trauma caught up with me. I didn't have a language for it. I didn't have the right support for it. I didn't have any support at all. And so I had been sort of muscling through everything, going on fumes, and I had all kinds of things working against me. I had very severe social anxiety disorder, and I had very severe depression, and no reasonable way of interfacing with it. So I had taken some time off. So it took me about 5 or 6 years to, kind of finish, and I think I pretty much. No, that's not true. I was going to say, I think I pretty much immediately ran away from home, but that's not true. I worked for the IRS for a couple of years. Maybe not, no, not 2 years. No, for about a year. And then that job was compromising because I thought I was going to pursue opera at the time, and that job was compromising my voice because of the environment. So I quit that job and bartended for a year.
Okay.
And in the middle of that bartending year, I was seeing interviews with Tori Amos and Dave Matthews, and there was just this magic thing going on where I would like catch something in the middle of the night. I know when I heard Dave Matthews play the Stone on the Charlie Rose show, I was like, what is that? What's happening? Like, I had no context for it whatsoever because I was a nerdy classical kid. No context, Like, I barely even caught the Nirvana thing. Like,
Really?
Yeah, no, I'm sitting here, I'm listening to, like, Stravinsky and Shostakovich and stuff. That's metal to me, But, like, yeah, no context. So here's this cat. You're playing an acoustic guitar, channeling something that I have no context for. I just know I'm into it.
Yeah.
And so I'm enthralled. I'm like, and Charlie Rose is asking him all these questions about, well, how did you form your band and how did you do, and I'm taking notes. I'm like, oh, you go to everybody. Okay. Oh, I see. You reach out to all the people you admire in town and you book something because they're not going to rehearse unless you got a book. Oh, fraternities, you say, like I'm taking notes.
That's awesome though. That's where every great plan starts, on a piece of paper,
Right. So I'm just like, oh, this is a thing? Let me know more about this thing. I have no idea why it hit me as hard as it did. Maybe it's because I was like a pure open vessel, Well,
it was foreign to you, but you knew instantly that you loved it.
I knew instantly that I dug it. So I went to Best Buy at the time, and you get good records at Best Buy for good prices. Went to Best Buy. I bought like 5 CDs. And it was all like, Lily knows nothing about any of this stuff. I'm just like in here trying to feel out, like,
sure,
show me something that I might, like. So I ended up with Lenny Kravitz's 5.
Okay.
Tori Amos's To Venus and Back. I got the double disc of Dave Matthews and, oh man, what was his name? The crazy Tim Reynolds.
Okay.
It was a double disc Tim Reynolds, Dave Matthews concert at some, college. Totally blew my mind. And I can't remember what the other two discs are. But I just know I got these 5 discs. I quit my bartending job because I like made just right enough tips the night before working a Sting concert with Michelle and Dege Cello opening, that like I had enough cash to get to Boston. At the time, gas was 69 cents a gallon all the way up to DC, you know?
Yeah.
So I got in my Crown Victoria, my 88 Crown Vic. and
Tank,
moved
though.
to,
Tank,
and,
though.
tank,
Yeah,
and
it's
moved
tank.
to Boston with these 5 discs playing on repeat. Like, you know?
Were you searching for the
And I'm
messages
just like,
in there? What do I do next, Dave
Right,
Matthews? What do I do next? That's wonderful, though, man. That's the stuff dreams are made of.
Right.
You have to go through these. It's paying your dues.
Yeah.
You have to go through these motions, and you have to experience these things. That's fantastic. So,
And like the car got me to Boston and then broke down as soon as it got there.
Did it
like
really?
some electrical problem. So I parked it on the street. Never saw that car again. Never. I lost all the stuff that was in that car. You know, it's just like, well, they got me here. Like now we're here.
you
Make it
gathered
work.
no moss,
Right.
young lady, for sure. So, what did life hold for you in Boston?
So what got me there was that like the year before, when I was busy winning classical voice competitions, I had been invited to sing at an event and for a faculty from my boarding school who was retiring. And there was a New England-based singer-songwriter there who sang a song that like kind of alerted me to the singer-songwriter thing.
Okay.
And I thought it was magical and totally self-expressed. And I was just like, I want to know about that. And this was right around the same time when I had started writing songs that I myself didn't understand because I didn't have a context for them.
What style were those?
They were my style.
Mixed bag.
They were just they were art songs,
Yeah.
but just not art songs that I could sing in a recital hall. They
Well,
were.
I mean, fair enough. But what I'm saying is essentially, which is a question I hate to pose to people, but if you had to put it into a genre or a neighborhood at least,
I think.
what did it feel like?
I think some of it felt like jazz.
Okay.
A little bit like jazz, but I knew nothing about jazz. I'd never studied any jazz, and in fact, when I told my piano professor that I was interested in studying jazz, he gave me a monograph about why jazz was an inferior art form, and that I shouldn't pursue that. Like I had talent as a classical pianist,
Wonderful.
you know, and I shouldn't pursue it. So I was wholly ignorant about jazz, right?
Yeah.
My mom had like 3 or 4 jazz records in her, and I had transcribed some Dave Brubeck records, you know, or some Cannonball Adderley at some point. But I was wholly ignorant about the language, and so that's why I'm hesitant to claim that title, because, you know, like if you heard me play it, they'd be like, oh yeah, she don't know that. Because I didn't know that.
Well, let me ask you this. Were you paying attention to the different instruments that frequented these different styles of music?
Absolutely not.
I mean, that helps.
I was playing my piano. That's
Okay.
all I knew.
Okay, well, I mean, the piano will traverse all genres, so
Correct.
I understand.
And that's kind of how I was using the piano. I was putting my hands on the piano and looking for the sounds that made sense, and then I would looking for rhythms that made sense and to me, and then, you know, maybe a melody was in my head and I'd be looking for how to dress up that melody, or maybe the piano would show me something and then some words would come that would somehow accompany what the piano had showed me. But it was a completely organic relationship. It had no adherence or interest or whatever or awareness of genre at all. Like I wasn't even savvy enough to know that genre was a thing.
Yeah.
Like I literally didn't know. So like mixed bag, eclectic, you know, all these useless words that you can't market for anything.
Hey, you're an elitist darling, though.
Right,
you could
exactly,
be, you know
right?
what I'm saying? So,
You know?
So I mean, you might have found your own crowd by accident,
Right.
So you go to Boston, and was that the mission to go perform, and you
The
planned
mission
on
was to
staying
go
in
figure out
Boston,
what was
or
going
what?
on. Yeah, because that one lady that I heard at that one thing was living in Boston. And then when I read about her, it made it seem like she had a community around her, a bunch of women writing songs. And I was like, okay, I want to know what you're doing. I want to know about what you're doing. So I went there to it was a reconnaissance mission,
But I mean, you dropped everything to go.
I
As
absolutely
far as you were
did.
concerned, you were going to touch down and stay down there.
Yeah,
So,
yeah.
Up there.
I was like, this is where the information is. This is
Right,
where I
right,
live
right.
now,
Now,
It was
where were these
awkward as
people
hell.
from that you were listening to? Because I don't know offhand. Where were some of the artists that were your favorites? Did that occur to you as maybe that's an epicenter? I mean, like our generation saw Seattle boom over Nashville. Like that became relevant mecca
Right.
for us,
And I think, we had Lilith Fair. Our generation also had Lilith Fair, which seemed to have an eclectic array of women doing all sorts of music. So you had, Indigo Girls, who I actually always loved. I had, and they were from where I was from, and so that didn't help diminish the obsession at all, So, you had that crowd. You had the Ani DeFranco people, whose label that I'm currently on. We had like the Sarah McLachlan people. You had Laura Love. So you had a real eclectic array. Tracy Chapman was up in there. So you had this and she had come out of the Boston scene. She had gone to Tufts. She had worked in Club Passim, which is a big folk venue. And so these were all people that I was aware of. Even, Sheryl Crow was up in there. So we had this like wide array of women artists kind of functioning on the high end scale of commercial ability. And then what I found, or what I thought was going to be in this Boston scene, was a tiny microcosm of that.
Yeah, like an
just
incubator of
working
sorts.
right. Yeah. So on the Boston scene, it was Jennifer Kimball, who used to be in a group called The Story. It was basically the New England version of the Indigo Girls. So there was The Story with her, and Jonathan Brooke was the other member of that. Then there was Megan Twohey, who was charming and hilarious. Katie Curtis, Faith Salloway came to town. She was from like the Second City scene out in Chicago.
Okay.
So she brought like comedy to folk music, and then she would put on these big productions where she would invite all of the folk ladies of the town, and they would do a play together at the big theater in Somerville. And so there was a scene, and they were playing at Irish pubs, and there was Chris Delmhurst was another one. So it's all people that if you're in the folk community, these artists, like all of these people.
Yeah.
And a lot of them may not have hit like mainstream commercial success, but they have very sustainable careers, and make very beautiful music.
Well, people don't realize how far that stretches being a songwriter.
Yeah.
Like you can fuel a sector of music. You can fuel a large landscape, a large portion. Like they reach far and wide.
Right.
Somebody could take a song that was meant for Nashville, change the cadence on it, and now it's coming out of the West Coast, and it has nothing to do with country.
Right.
And that's
what my
fascinating.
favorite example of that is? That Irma Thomas tune, Anyone Who Knows What Love Is?
Yes.
Well, that was written by Nashville writers. That's a country song.
Yeah.
But like it worked in the pop realm, it works as an R&B joint.
Exactly.
You know, and that's to me, like there's the self-expressive art music that I was doing. But also, I was developing an appreciation for what a good timeless song is. And I realized that the real lifespan of a good song is its anatomy, not how you dress it up. And I'm really glad that I learned that. And I think I learned it because I was an outsider observing. Had I been on the inside, I would think, oh, a good song. Oh, you have to, and you're living in Nashville. Oh, it has to be country. It has to da 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 da. I'm like, no, I learned from the outside looking in that a good song is its anatomy, and you can dress it up however you want.
I don't understand. I wouldn't even know how to frame that experience for you or through your eyes vicariously, because you didn't know you were dealing with one instrument, and that's in all genres. It didn't occur to you that, maybe the sax is going to be found mainly in jazz music or something. In
fact, I absolutely didn't want a saxophone in my music at all. So guess who I hired? A clarinet. I'm going to play a clarinet, and I call myself trying to enter the pop arena on a clarinet.
But then there's also the anatomy of song. Like you will find, and I'm not privy to this, I just notice a few things here and there. I can't go too deep, but you're going to find choruses are more frequent in certain genres. Or you're going to find these elements, and you're talking about what makes a song timeless. It's a mixture of that shit. What are you talking about?
Right.
But and then like you said, but it was a good point that you made. That the pop comes at the end. So something could have a pop sensibility, right? And it's just the ornaments that we adorn this framework with. But so good luck to you back then.
When I Will Always Love You was written, Dolly was a country artist, and therefore it was a country song.
Yeah.
Is that song actually a country song?
Through that person, it is.
That song, we just talking about the song. That song has all the elements of a timeless language. You got a chord progression from that same era I was talking about before. Very straightforward and predictable. Some slight variations which catches your attention, but only subliminally. That's good. You got a lyric that everybody can relate to, bittersweet memories and love. It's like those go perfectly together.
Yeah, I get
if you
what
don't
you're
know
saying.
anything else,
I'm just saying,
so
how was a younger version of you going to realize any of this? Because all the things you've told me.
Oh, because I'm a genius. I forgot to tell you that.
Right. Oh, okay, well that helps. That helps.
No. Just because I'm a student. I'm a student of communication. I'm a student of humanity. I'm a student of music. And I feel like pop languages, and because to me, it's a giant umbrella. Quincy Jones said the only difference between a jazz record and a pop record is the number of units sold.
Interesting.
So I'm coming from that end. Of course, I follow Quincy Jones largely because he's a genius, but also because he studied composition and counterpoint with my idol, this French teacher named Nadia Boulanger, who I had like developed an obsession with when I was still very young, So I'm like, oh, he managed to find his way over there to study with her. Let me listen to everything he has to say about music. And so I think his mind is just as open and way more so than mine ever was, So yeah, like I'm just a student of all of this, and I'm here on the outside looking in, and I put the pieces together in a way that may have been unique to me, but I also think there's something intrinsically true about some of the stuff I discovered.
Sure.
So, and I think that
especially when your language is timeless.
Right.
When you're speaking on timelessness.
Right. And
that's going to be 100% true.
Right. Yeah. So you can have stuff that is very much a function of this moment that dies in this moment. And then you can have stuff that's also a function of this moment that still is compelling 200 years later. I was always interested in the latter. I was always more interested in what are the elements that made this stick.
Sure.
that attached itself to our freaking brainstem, you know, and became a part of the collective consciousness. What makes that happen? And I can't necessarily say that in my own writing, I know that I have found that and know how to implement that. But I can say that I have been taking notes for a good 20 years and longer if you can consider my classical studies, and that I have a deep, profound respect for any elements that I discover. Like, so for me, in my world, you know, Nirvana and Beethoven are like in the same conversation.
I understand.
You know?
Yeah.
Or like, you know, as is Kendrick Lamar, as is, you know, like, and I experience all these music in categories of, oh, that's art. Like, for example, Beyonce's new record, she's doing all the things that she needs to do to make it a commercial success, but I hear it as art music. And I'm not saying that in a negative way, because obviously I'm a person who has a lot of respect for art music. But when I hear that record, like maybe she's got a couple of pop hits on it, and they're very mathematical in why they work and why they're so catchy.
Yeah.
But in context, and I like to take the whole album the same way I take a whole symphony, not just one movement. I like to take the whole album. And when I take the whole album, I'm like, this is art music. And, you know, and it's art music that is competing in a pop arena. But I like to hold space for being able to do the analysis on both sides. Like, take it as it's whole, and take it like all the extra implications that are embedded in it, and all the counterpoint that's embedded in it, and all the, you know, take that, and also, you know, oh, okay, so the pop side of that record is more about business, you know, but on the whole, I see it as an art music offering. So, you know, the world is like, for me, the lines are very swimmy, you know.
Well, I think it's important in any endeavor to be unbiased and objective. You don't want to lean, or you don't want your vision skewed in any direction initially, because then you're approaching it with, you've been tampered with. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah,
like,
and then you'll never know what was possible.
Right. And honestly, the reverse is true for whoever's putting out that work. That word that I was looking for earlier was contrived. And if they're aiming for something that is not altruistic, then it will be felt and it will be noticed as contrived. And that can be communicated with just the slightest, like you said, subliminal message. Just the slightest nuance can give you that feeling. And when I feel something is contrived, I'm vilifying that. I'm vilifying that person. Like, you... I will, yeah, I mean...
You're a purist, huh?
That's it. I'm banging the gavel and I'm holding court, and I think you're a fake, and you can get the hell out of here right now.
And me, I just have to hit nicks. Like, Liz makes fun of me all the time, because for me it happens within the first 10 seconds of the track.
Exactly.
And then like, psh,
yes,
like,
you know.
give me something I can feel. If I can't feel it...
And you couldn't verbalize that process. It happened in 10 seconds, but it went deep. You know what I mean?
Right.
Hey, have you heard about NewOrleansMusicians.com? It's a place where articles, music videos, interviews, and streaming music from Louisiana musicians can be found. Fans can join free. Music business professionals can join free too. And Louisiana musicians can join for free as well. It's also the place where Louisiana bands go to network and get free promotion. We've definitely got plenty, like this band. Check them out.
the problem is, no, it didn't go deep. That was the problem.
Well, yeah, but I mean, there was some cognition that you went through.
You can feel the formulas, but there's nothing extra outside of the formula.
Yeah.
I understand that formulas are good and useful. I do understand that. But if you don't give me extra information, my friend Marcus and I, he's a music writer for the Tennessean. We've taken to calling it thick air. Mm-hmm. Like, the air gotta get thick. If you ain't giving me thick air, I'm hitting next. You know?
Okay. Nobody wants anything diluted, I suppose.
Right.
So where do you go in these circles that you are longing to, or actually being near, moving near in Boston at that time? What do you do with that? What does that enable you to do?
I started trying to use the Dave Matthews like things. So like I'll go to all these clubs and check out all the musicians and approach anybody that I thought was special, you know, because I thought instead of thinking about what instruments are playing what role, like I went a long time working without a bass player at all, like that kind of stupid stuff.
Yeah. Anybody could do it.
What I thought was that if you put I think I was thinking of it like chamber music in the classical tradition.
Okay.
A chamber ensemble can be any configuration of musicians, you know.
True.
And I think I was thinking of it that way. And I think what I thought was if you put a bunch of special musicians together, you'll make special music.
Sure.
And I thought, you know, we won't necessarily be avant-garde because we'll be organizing it around these compositions or around these songs, but the people mattered more than the instrumentation, you know. And this was, I will admit, I never got so far in my compositional studies that I actually studied instrumentation. Mm-hmm. I tried to learn instrumentation from for classical compositions. I tried to learn it from books and stuff, but it's like trying to learn how to be a master pianist by studying YouTube videos. It's just like, it's not the real thing.
I brought it up more so because I was interested in viewing these things through your lens, such to where I would understand, like, what are you picking out of not just the song itself and the melody, would, you know, these essential things that I consider essential elements to kind of framing the characteristics of maybe different genres or the many different song compositional avenues that you could take. One of which, I mean, if you're composing, is what instruments to use. But it's not so much a necessity. Like you brought up a bass. The Doors didn't have a bassist, but the keyboard would cover that bass section.
And I was a very left-handed piano player, so I felt I had
translate.
it covered. Right.
These things can translate. Like you can, right? So you could play heavy on the left, and
also the
you'll cover
clarinetist that would, because you asked like, okay, what musicians did you? I figured the musicians I had were the musicians I was going to use. Mm-hmm. And so I had a clarinetist, a very special instrumentalist. His name is Todd Brunel. I had a clarinetist, and he felt like we were weak on the low end, so he started playing bass clarinet. So now, because I have a bass clarinet and I feel these vibrations in my ensemble, I start writing stuff that sounds like Eric Dolphy. I've never heard of Eric Dolphy, never heard a single composition.
Okay.
But then we go out and play, and they're like, "Oh, y'all sound like Eric Dolphy." Or even and with that sound in my work, like I started playing other piano things that felt like it was married to that sound, and they were like, "Oh, you sound like Alice Coltrane." So now I sound like Alice Coltrane and Eric Dolphy, but I'm also writing tunes that sound like show tunes. And I'm also, but I don't listen to musicals. And I'm also writing. So I don't know so luckily the people who were attracted to my music were all people who are very musically informed. And they would tell me, oh, you should go listen to Phoebe Snow, or you should go listen to Laura Nero, or you should go, you know.
Do you, though? I was going to ask, what do you do in that moment? Because I feel like, I'll tell you this. I've always dabbled in music. I've always played around with bass and keys and digital audio workstations, things of that nature. I've always noticed about myself that if I go listen to something before I get whatever's in my head out, it ain't gonna happen. I gotta do this first. It has to come out like this, even if it's garbage and I gotta hit delete. I gotta get this out first, or else if I go listen to something else, like let's say what people tell me I sound like in your case, I'm gonna taint that. So what do you do? Like,
well, there are two things that happen for me. One is, you're right, I don't listen to a ton of music because I want to keep writing music. It's true. But when somebody's trying to educate me, and I've been educated in all this other music,
yeah,
I feel like it behooves me to, widen my vocabulary, just awareness.
Yeah.
But what generally happens with me is that if I listen to this music and I find that somebody else has actually completed the thread that this is on, I end up hopping to another thread.
You get bored with it quick, huh?
Yeah, I'm just like, oh, I'm done. But I do that with my own stuff. That's why all of my albums are different, because I'm like, I've said what I had to say there.
Sure.
Now I'm going to go say something else using a different language,
Yeah.
So I do that with myself as much as I do that with these other artists. But then there are also artists who I think are as broad and as wide and crazy as I am.
Sure.
And like Laura Nero is an example of that, where she was writing songs that like people would turn into rock songs, people turn into soul songs, people turn into... But her songs were pretty weird. And her musical vocabulary was not... that's why I actually call myself a singer-songwriter, because it's not my job to make it a genre. If I were... there are two identities that I've really claimed. One is singer-songwriter, the other is artist. And Laura Nero is a good example of both of those. As a singer-songwriter, people would take her songs and interpret them and make them what they needed to be, because they were singular and they would stand out. But the songs that she wrote for herself were songs that nobody else could sing, nobody else could play. You get weird meters, sections going crazy, you're doing all crazy stuff with your voice. I listened to a lot of Laura Nero at that time in my life and was like, this is a hot mess. I don't want And like everywhere I went, people were comparing me to her. I was like, damn, this is what I sound like, And it was scary. Yeah. But like now when I listen to Laura Nero, all of my music makes more sense to me. I'm like, she didn't write anything that sounds like this, but somehow her being so self-expressive leaves the room wide open for me to be as self-expressive as I want to be. And the other title that I've claimed is artist, and this is because my shows will go through all of these genres. And yes, I've learned what some of the touchstones are, and I've learned what some of the roles are, and and that's been a long education. And I'm still pretty green. And I still love being educated. But I've learned enough to give people the reference points that they might be looking for, so that I can get them oriented and then disrupt that orientation at my will.
Right. You know? That's the reassurance you give the audience, and that they'll trust you to go a little bit further with you.
Right. And then when they're nice and comfortable, I'm like, here we go. You know?
That's funny. But you know what came to mind while you were saying that is, take for example a cover song.
Okay.
Now there's two basic ways to do a cover song, and that's exactly like it was done or with your own spin.
Right.
And so when you speak of music that doesn't have a place currently, I mean, let's face it, writing the song itself and then placing it into someone's hands, that someone is the vessel for that song. Mm-hmm. It's got to pass through that person before it gets delivered audibly to everyone else. So in order for that to happen, and in order for that person to play it, they have two choices at that moment. Am I a vessel simply for the song the way it was written, or do I tell everyone how I view this song?
Now,
and then once it passes through that person...
Let's be clear about this, though. I feel like I understand where you're going with this.
Yeah.
But I want to be clear about, there's a difference between, do I want to do it the way it was presented or the way it was written? Because people hear something in their head when they're writing it that is not, or not. Sometimes you don't hear it in your head when you're writing a lyric, But some people do hear it in their head. Like, for example, I have a song on my new album. When I wrote it, I heard Tom Petty singing it. I will never sound like Tom Petty. You know, so when my body did, which is where I think you're going, when my body put it out there, like, it came out a certain way. It came out the Lilli Lewis way, and then we produced it around the way my body presented it. If somebody were to cover that song, the last thing I would want them to do is try to do it the way my body did it. I want them to do it the way their body does it. And this is something that happens in classical singing too. A lot of students early on come in trying to sound like singers that they've heard before.
Yeah.
And they do all this contrived stuff to sound like a different singer. And it's the teacher's job to excavate their voice so that every time you go to sing an aria that's been around for a couple of 100 years, you're singing it in a singular body that's only been around for 20, 30 years, you know what I mean?
Sure.
And so that's how I approach any cover I do. I'm like, I got to do it in the way that makes the most sense to this body, you know? And so I rarely do covers, but when I do them, like, you ain't never getting a replication. Like, I wouldn't do it. It doesn't make any sense to me to do it that way.
Sure.
I respect people who try, and sometimes people pull it off. But it doesn't excite me. What excites me is when Dolly Parton sings her song, her lovely song. Mm-hmm. And then Whitney Houston sings an equally lovely song. And I love the different vocabularies that come from the different bodies, like the kind of indigeneity of the body, because the voice is the only instrument that's like that. Like, nobody can, like, pick up my body and play it, you know. And, you know, if I sell my saxophone, anybody, you know, you might find your own tone, but it's the same instrument. The body is the instrument, and nobody else can play it.
There's nothing that will give me chills quicker. Music does, but there's nothing that'll give me chills quicker than vocals.
Yeah.
Strong vocals.
Yeah.
So, so you're picking up more of what a singer-songwriter looks like, behaves like. Your time in Boston, is this sort of you coming into your own? Because is it your first moment of independence? What was the situation when you were in Georgia? Because you were at home and away from home, but you didn't really have your own independence, correct?
I did, actually. My home life, my family life was very toxic and terrible. I had moved out of my mom's place. I think I was like 16 or 17.
Okay.
So I had been living independently for a long time. Okay. I did, when I started working for the IRS, I did live with my mom again during that time because I was trying to save up to move to New York to keep studying voice. And also because my mom needed help paying her bills because she was in a very deep depression and she couldn't get out of bed. So I was kind of trying to facilitate all of that stuff, and then I was flying to New York on weekends to study opera. And
wow.
And when I realized how toxic that was, actually the event that made me realize it was a big fight with my brother. He tried to attack my mom, and I pulled him off of her, and I was screaming at him in a way that caused a vocal strain. That made me lose my voice. So I had thought I was going to go to another conservatory for opera, but it took too long to repair. I didn't have money to do the vocal repairs, and so my voice just moved into another arena.
Wow.
And so for a long time, that's kind of what left me trying to figure out how to sing some of the songs that I had been writing. Because first of all, I didn't realize it at the time, but they were all too weird for somebody else to sing them. And so, so I just, it was me repairing myself, healing myself, exploring myself.
Sure.
You know, it was really an incubator type period. I would say more than anything else.
Yeah.
And I was surrounded by a lot of high-minded musicians who could accommodate all my weirdness and never made me feel like I didn't belong, so to speak, but also that didn't help me understand why I wasn't finding footing.
Did you even view it as a disadvantage?
View what as a disadvantage?
I guess like you've been able to verbalize how outside of the realm of, I guess, the normal mechanics of songwriting, you were in your process and the different genres that you spanned. So I mean, you've done well being able to point out the reasons why you were, let's say, outside the box, so to speak. But was there ever a moment where you felt like it was a disadvantage? Because like when people are young children, we tell them that, you know, being unique is okay, be yourself, but by the time they're a teenager, the last thing they want to do is stand out, like they're embarrassed, you know. When they get older, they realize that this is a beautiful thing to be a unique person. Do you know what I mean? So,
Yeah.
I mean, how did you view it at this time?
I think I had never not been an outsider in any environment I had ever been in. Mm-hmm. So, you know, I was an awkward nerd. In grade school, elementary school, I was afraid of everybody. I was like I said, severe social anxiety. I always, you know, kind of processed information differently than everybody around me, and everywhere I went, like I would develop great one-on-one relationships, but in groups I would collapse, and so I was always an outsider. And so I thought my outsiderness was a setback, and I think I still do, you know. But I didn't at the time, partially because you don't know what you don't know. I didn't at the time think of my outsiderness as a musician as a bad thing, because I personally thought that everybody was trying to find their authentic voice, and nobody cared about genre. Nobody writing music cared about genre or anything like that. Nobody was trying to fit in. Everybody was just using the tools that they had to be as authentic as possible.
I mean, that's honestly reality in artistic communities.
So that's what I took for granted.
Yeah.
And if my stuff was just like not quite fitting in, I just thought of it as a yet thing. Like, oh, I just don't fit in yet.
Gotcha.
You know? Because I had a lot of pieces informing me. Like, so I had the classical stuff. I had a thing for Coltrane. I had developed a thing for Sweet Honey in the Rock. I loved a cappella music, like a cappella singing. I love harmony more than anything. So it's just like, you know, harmony and piano and harmony and piano, you know. So I had all kinds of, you know, weird, you know, Bobby McFerrin was the musician that made the most sense to me on the planet, you know, at the time. And he went all the way from, you know, he had his Don't Worry, Be Happy phase. He had his, like, weird avant jazz phase. He became a classical conductor and conducted Chick Corea, playing the Mozart concertos that I played, you know.
Yeah.
So I was like, this guy gets it, you know. So I wasn't he had that duo album with Yo-Yo Ma, who was my favorite cellist. You know, I was like, he gets it. And I was like, if there are not that many people who get it around me, it's just because I haven't met enough people. They're out there. We have you know.
That's
so
awesome.
I just didn't.
Yeah.
I didn't think that. I didn't think that my approach to music was working against me. I learned that it was. I'm still learning that it does. I'm still learning that it does, but at the time, that was like the farthest thought from my mind.
What began falling into place once you started this Dave Matthews method, where you started to assemble your team, right?
I assembled my team. We made a record. It was eclectic and weird, but I liked the music on it. And
indie produced, or how did you go about?
Yeah, actually, we re-recorded some of our live shows, and maybe like 3 or 4 studio cuts in there, just as like interludes between live stuff. But the live stuff was fairly avant-garde. And at the time, like, you know, I kind of considered myself a folk musician because I didn't know anybody. I still do. But we were opening for, because people would hear us and not be able to know how to place us, really, you know, but they just knew they liked it. So we were opening for metal bands and punk bands and folk shows and jazz shows, like,
that's to your advantage.
Right, I thought so.
Yeah.
I found out that it worked against me when people started calling me, because people started following us around to these different shows. Mm-hmm. And then eventually they would call me, like, let's say we had opened for an R&B artist or a hip-hop show one night, and the folk heads came to that show, assuming that I only played folk shows and didn't know it was a hip-hop show. Suddenly they're around a bunch of people that make them feel very uncomfortable. So they started calling me and asking me, so who's going to be at this show? Uh-huh. And that's when I realized, oh, I'm not the problem.
Yeah.
I'm not the problem. People don't want to be next to each other. And I've never been in an environment where I've felt a part of the homogeneity. Mm. And so it took me a long time to understand that homogeneity is its own organism. And if I didn't learn how to work with that skillfully, I was going to be in trouble.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So how do you address that?
First of all, and this is like business 101, it just took me a long time to get there because I was all about music 101. Mm-hmm. Business 101 and art 101, but business 101 says know your audience. And because, like, I think I expected my audience to be people who are like me, mm-hmm. but we're very few and far between. And the secret is we don't like people that much. So we're not going to go out looking for each other. So I interpret that to mean know who you're playing for.
Yeah.
And get to know what makes them feel safe. And if you want to ask more of them, be skillful about it. As I started to learn that when I started getting those calls. And then I started getting those calls, and at first it really, really threw me off because I'm connective by nature. I'm not a separatist in any way. Mm-hmm. Like, I wouldn't play the Michigan Women's Festival because they wouldn't let the dudes in my band come on the... I'm like, well, okay, you know, I am a woman's woman, but no, okay, never mind. So I have a really hard time with hard lines. And so at first it really threw me off, and I would just book myself anywhere I could all over the country, even though I'm getting responses that are like, oh, I thought you would be too ethnic for my venue and stuff like that. And it was really, really hard, honestly, as a black singer-songwriter at the time who was kind of not writing, you know, in an R&B idiom at all, you know. I didn't have a home, and I was like, well, that's okay because I'm not going to buy into this homogeneity model, you know, regardless of where it is or how it's expressed. But honestly, I didn't grow up around that stuff till I moved to Louisiana, because the musical intelligence here is off the charts, and the people intelligence here is also off the charts. And I came to understand that being connective, like, first of all, the art is not all about you and what you want to say. Mm-hmm. you're so important that you can ignore, thousands of years of history, and you can ignore like the way people think and feel, and the troubles that are happening in their kitchen, and blah 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 blah. You're just a purist, and aren't you so special? No, it's not about that. So here is where I learned that caring about the audience, caring about facilitating a healing, joyful experience for them, is a sacred practice. And whether you're singing about, you could be singing about the frogs in the swamp and still be doing a sacred practice. It's how you do it. And it's how, like, there are all these subtle ways to show that you care about the people that you're singing for. And once I got here and I kind of took that in on a visceral level, I started being able to marry my weird ways with the ways of the people. And I started getting to experience myself as the people for the first time in my life.
Wow.
This is the first time I ever felt like I belonged somewhere. And maybe it's because, like, in New Orleans, everybody's a misfit anyway,
I think that it's an atmosphere that fosters and nurtures eclecticism.
Yeah, right.
I think that we welcome that sort of thing. And I mean, if we had to, like, think why, I don't know. We've been under different rules, Spanish rules, French rules over the years. So I mean, and we've kind of become a deposit of sorts for different mores and values.
And I also think that it has to do with the terrain. Like, the terrain for the indigenous people that lived here, like, the name that they had for the land was uninhabitable. You ain't supposed to live here, right? So already, you're a renegade by, like, trying to build a city on land that you're not supposed to build a city on. And because so many structures fall apart so easily, like, the folks here really do have to lean on each other in ways that are really quite soulful. I noticed, like, when I moved from Boston to Georgia, and we go to restaurants and they would do the Southern hospitality thing, be like, okay, sweetheart, blah, 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 blah. I would get mad. I'd be like, you don't know me like that. Why are you talking? But when I moved, where did we move here from? We had just lived in Connecticut when we moved back to Louisiana. This is where my wife is from. Mm-hmm. We had just lived in Connecticut, moved back here, and we got to New Orleans, and people at the Burger King drive-in or whatever be like, okay, what else you need, my baby? And I'd be like, I'm your baby! Like, there was something in the tone when they took ownership of, just these, like, micro doses of caring, that hit me on the cellular level, anyway.
I tell you what, though, it's the way you described it, and you have to realize that it is a form of passion, and there's passionate love, and there's also crimes of passion. It's an intense, it's a propensity to feel intensively, if you want to say.
Right.
Like, we have a lot of capacity for that. Right. It runs deep. And
well, that's the other thing. Like, I learned about me, and, like, they have these different models, like, the Myers-Briggs or whatever. Like, there's another thing. You ever heard of the Enneagram? It's a personality profile.
No.
So these are all, like, personality profile things. I learned in that particular model, I'm considered an individualist. And our problem is that we feel things so deeply. Oh, so deeply. I realize New Orleans is a city full of fours. It's a city full of individualists who are just like, oh, so important, like everything.
I'd have to take the test and find out, but I mean, it kind of sounds like me. I prefer something that you said earlier that I took note of, is that you prefer one-on-one interaction as opposed to groups. I'm the same way, and it's not because I don't want to have a bunch of friends or be well liked or any of those things. It's just that I value the experience and the interaction so much to where one-on-one suits me better because I can pay attention to that person. If you're in charge of a group of people, there's so much you're not going to realize, and there's thus so much you're not going to appreciate, you know? So, I mean, I get it, you know, and I don't think it's to anyone's deficit. It might make things change or turn out differently, you know. It's been said that there are a lot, and I've noticed there are a lot of musicians in New Orleans that are unto themselves. You'll have one guy working in 3 different bands. And like I've said before, you know, at the end of the night, you go your way and he goes his way. And, you know, if you meet up again, that's cool. Y'all will pick up where you left off. But there's no Fox Force 5 forming, you know, the Voltron is not going to happen on Bourbon Street, you know what I'm saying? So picture somebody in my shoes that is trying to bring everyone to the table with NewOrleansMusicians.com. I'm trying to say everybody come together, and people are like, fuck you. We love you, but fuck you, you know? So, I mean, it's not easy to do. There's no concrete way to show people that they need this. And that's the first thing that marketers try to do is prove to you that you have some sort of deficit in your life. You need this can opener. You need that. You need that. I can't really do that because we've functioned on these practices for decades and it's worked. You know, we could be stronger if we were together, but it's not completely necessary.
Well, I think one of the things that I find unfortunate about the New Orleans scene in general is that they might understand the value of being connected in their scene. You know, the New Orleans scene, which is a tiny, tiny microcosm of the musical universe.
All things considered, yes.
But what about the artists and the writers in town who don't know that there's a genre outside of, like, they're writing in some other style, but they don't know that there's a place for their style because they're surrounded by New Orleans funk and New Orleans trad and you know, everything is got to be oriented around New Orleans. And I think that a lot of times in doing the gig hustle that they do their gig, they go home, you know, they drink their drinks, go, you know, in doing that gig hustle, they fail to try to see themselves in the larger context of this landscape, you know, and you might get like a really bit, like the Nevilles would break through, or like Dirty Dozen, like, you know, somebody would come along and like use them in the larger landscape. Trombone Shorty is another good example.
Be the catalyst to take them on the road and show them the other environment. Sure,
but it's few and far between. You know, some of the best bands in New Orleans would murder a lot of these bands out here on the road, and yet they never leave home.
Right.
You know, and I just get frustrated because I see what's out there on the larger landscape, and I'm like, the language here is so rich. It has so much information. You could get a funk band here that could make you feel the same things you were feeling listening to Nirvana.
Yeah.
Because it's not contrived. Like, but then you get out there and you see the little, like, the horn bands out there in the world trying to copy what happens here, and you can't feel anything. And I'm like, and it's not about the groove. It's not about the beat. It's about all the human emotional content that gets processed through that.
Nuance is like the fine spectrum.
You know,
it's a broad spectrum, but it deals with finite pieces, you know.
And everybody, even your most basic practitioner here, has a sense of that. And so the product can be so multidimensional. And I'm like, that's where the information is, and we're not really getting it to the world to the extent to which it could. Like, we don't have any Nirvana-sized bands, you know.
Well, I mean, it's been said they got to leave here to come back and be successful here.
Well, that's true. Like, if they want to get paid, there's no money here.
Right.
Get that straight. Ain't no money here. If you want to get paid, you got to leave. You know, I mean, there are people who are doing the gig thing locally, but like none of that pays well enough to get above poverty wages. It just, for several years, every year I would look up what the average musician wage is here, and like we're mostly reporting between $8,000 and $15,000 a year. You know, and to the rest of the world. To the rest of this country, at least, I won't say the world because, but the rest of this country, at least, that's total subsistence. That's not a living at all.
Sure.
But here, since we live for the music, we're like, what? I'm getting by. Like, I pay my rent.
How much of that do you attribute to saturation?
This is loaded because it's layered. Okay, so yes, saturation, especially post-Katrina saturation, because a bunch of people came here who could barely play their instruments, and a lot of people who could play their instruments and were used to getting paid got squeezed out of the scene.
Sure. Partially
because the businesses didn't have anything to pay you with because they were rebuilding themselves, and the same thing happened after the pandemic, and also partially because, well, if I can get these people for nothing, then why am I going to pay you something fair? You know? So that's, it might have started out of necessity and turned into a new culture that had totally corroded, the compensation culture, compensation structure. So that's part of it. Another part of it is because New Orleans is a tiny city. And even though 40, 50 years ago, Houston and Atlanta were the same size, Houston and Atlanta developed. New Orleans did not. In fact, New Orleans did everything it could to shoot itself in the foot not to develop. And
but Houston and Atlanta are not geographically locked like New Orleans is.
You're absolutely right. You're absolutely right. You're absolutely right. And also, New Orleans did some things to shoot itself in the foot, mainly because they were trying to protect the culture. I actually respect that, but where that lands when it comes to the financial reality is that it's a tiny market, and there's no even if you got rid of half the musicians in the city, there's still not enough money in the city to actually support a whole lifestyle. You actually have to have national income. You have to have broader income than just what's in that city.
Well,
because
I think the language that you're using kind of smears things together a little bit, because technically, if you ask me honestly, there is enough money in the city, right? A tourist town will at any point in time, especially during the popular times, it will contain or house enough money. It's just, how is that distributed? Where does it go, right? Taxes, where does it go? Does it go to the police force that the venue has to pay because they're open past a certain time? These different things, right? These different expenses that people endure, such to where in trickle-down economics, there's not much left for the music.
So let me say this. The tourists are not coming to the local venues. It's locals in the local venues. Mm-hmm. And so if you can count on locals showing up at the local venues and the venues paying you reasonably, mm-hmm. That's the structure that we used to have in certain pockets of the city. But tourists are largely not frequenting these venues in a way that would put tourist money in musicians' pockets. And the things that tourists pay for, they don't pay for music. They pay for tchotchkes and liquor.
Yeah.
They don't pay for music.
Yeah.
They might come to a festival and pay for that festival. And at that festival, are they going to buy albums? Not usually. Most of them buy tchotchkes and liquor.
Yeah.
And
a little bowl of jambalaya for $12.
Right, exactly. Right. You get the CD for $12 or a bowl of jambalaya that's going to last you for 3 minutes for $12. I'll take the jambalaya.
Yeah.
And that's how consumers work.
I get it. I get that. Before we started recording, you and I were talking all over the place about this stuff. Uh-huh. And I brought up that it's obvious that, and I don't know who to blame, but it's just obvious that there's a culture being nurtured that is centered around getting drunk and being cheaply amused, as opposed to being centered around this cultural epicenter that really should be stressed and should be cultivated to some degree to because it's the honest story, right? Because honestly, you can go get drunk anywhere in this country.
Correct.
You can go have a jambalaya or some kind of rice and sausage dish in any form anywhere in this country. At least you're getting closer to the culture with the jambalaya than you are the liquor.
Right.
But so
well, I mean, honestly, that's why I became a
right?
bartender, because I was like, oh, I can get a job anywhere, right?
Sure,
Anywhere,
yeah, smart
right.
move.
Yeah.
But so what occurs to me, I wrote a letter to
Also,
somebody
that Dave
and then
Matthews
deleted.
had been a bartender, so, you know.
Really?
Yeah.
Are you serious?
I'm serious.
Did you go play in a mall like him too?
I did.
Yeah?
I did.
No?
I don't think I did, but, you know.
That's funny. It occurs to me that I would love to do this. I'm not gonna, but I would love to do this. I would love to take all of the advertisements that are churned out by the city of New Orleans and the state in general, that are pitched to outlying areas, even overseas, and see what they tout as talking points or points of notable interest or special attractions in order to entice people to come to Louisiana or to come to New Orleans. Let's take that and make that our base story, and then turn that into a questionnaire to the same people that came. How did you enjoy Creole influence? Do they know what that is? Because if they don't and they spent a week here, the city and the state didn't do their job to show it to them. We need to figure out why that is. And that's super important. But it's not going to make any money necessarily. I mean, if you could show some sort of profit in it, then maybe it'll grab the attention of some local state senator or whatever. But at the end of the day, that's what's really important, right? And I don't think you're going to find that at these big venues that you're talking about. So it's a shame, I guess, to your point, that only locals go to local venues. Because if you travel like some people do, like couch surfing or going to stay with a family in Europe for a week,
Right.
you stay off the beaten path.
Yeah.
These tourist attractions, they're curated events that aren't really genuine.
But it's also, let's not forget that New Orleans is a pretty dangerous city. So the tourists are going to stay localized to the parts of the city that are advertised. That means Bourbon Street and Bourbon Street. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And like when people ask me, I try to at least direct them to Frenchmen. You
right?
know?
Me too.
Because they come to the city thinking that they're going to find the city on Bourbon Street. And I'm like, no. All you're going to find on Bourbon Street
Vomit.
is like, cover bands
vomit,
and vomit. Right?
frat boy fights,
Right.
and the T-shirt that
All
just
you're going to
really
find on Bourbon
registers
Street
on
are
two
the
brain
people
cells.
that are just ignorant as you. Like, and not to denigrate the quarter at all, but it is to say that, you know,
It's being used for another purpose.
it's its own theme park.
Yeah.
And it's like anybody who visits Nashville never leaving the Dollywood area, which is basically a strip mall. I mean, not Dollywood, the Opry area, which is like a strip mall and a like it looks like it used to be a movie theater where Opry actually happens now. But, you know, it's just like, it looks like sprawl. It looks like, what do you call that?
Suburbia, sprawling
Yeah,
suburbia.
it looks like, suburbia. So, yeah, that's Nashville culture. No, bruh. Like,
Right.
you know, and so we have this sort of built-in theme park. And, you know, you'll get tips as a musician if you're playing down there. Like, my band used to play Cafe and the Grill all the time. Mm-hmm. And when we had a big football game or something like that, the bar would be packed and we wouldn't be making any tips. And then my bass player would, like, play a bass solo in the metal zone and everybody like, woo! And they put a bunch of money in. So like we knew what it was that made people give us money.
Okay.
And we would try to time that out, So there's an ebb and flow to that.
Sure.
Da, 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 da. But nobody's really there for the music, the music is the wallpaper. It's not the focus. And I think that folks have figured out here that selling music is actually a very intentional act.
Yeah.
And you don't make nearly as much as if you put all of your intention into selling the booze. So, as a result, the quality of the music doesn't matter anymore. And the whatever beautiful extra information you might be putting into it largely doesn't matter anymore. Especially if you put so much information into it that people start to pay attention and they're not buying as much booze. Oh, that's a problem.
Yeah.
Now you've messed with my business model,
Yeah, well, business owners don't have to be music aficionados either.
Absolutely not. When they
usually are the antithesis.
It used to
give a club character.
Right. If you opened a club,
it was a character of the club.
Exactly.
And certain clubs would have certain types of music musicians play.
Right.
And so it's a shame. Like we all see the writing on the wall. We just don't know how to stop it.
Yeah, but I know that there are counterpoints to that. So like, for example, in Nashville, you had back in the 80s and 90s, you had this club called the Bluebird Cafe. Mm-hmm. And the club owners developed a culture of shushing people if they talked. Like, you're here to listen.
Right.
You don't want to listen.
Nice.
Don't be here. Be someplace else. And you would either be shushed or you'd be invited to leave, according to people who used to frequent the place. As a result, all kinds of industry people would be there, checking out new talent, publishing houses would come,
nice.
Labels would come, everybody got to know each other. It was incredibly, it was cutthroat competitive. Mm-hmm. But it's a small club, everybody's rubbing shoulders with each other, yada yada. Can't avoid touching each other, getting to know each other. And it's basically the golf course, how in business you do all these deals on the golf course. In Nashville, you would do all this business in this, in the Bluebird Cafe, this little tiny venue.
Nice.
And so to this day, the venue still exists. And as soon as they announce who's playing, whether or not you've ever heard of these artists, that venue sells out every show, every single show, within hours. Not, not days, hours. And it's because they spent 20 years cultivating this culture of, we're here for the songs.
You know what? It stands for something. And it may not yield immediate results, but it stands for something. And I think that if we could sort of curate our own audience to the city, that would stand for something.
Right. I'll tell you some other things going for the Bluebird Cafe. One, tourists go to that venue all the time. Mm-hmm. Two, they know how special they are, so they have posters that they make up for every show and sell them to the tourists who came specifically to experience this culture, right?
Yeah.
So now you got this other revenue flow that's not booze. That way, you don't have to count on your booze sales for your money. So at the end of the show, people get up and go get that poster instead of spending the whole show going to the bar and disrupting the music. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
All these little things. Yeah. When you know that what you have matters, it can lead to other revenue streams. Mm-hmm. But you just have, you got to go out on that limb and decide what matters to you. And if all that matters to you is that, is the food and beverage business, then the music's always going to be peripheral.
Yeah.
And that's just going to corrode the whole thing.
Yeah. Talk to me a little bit about the places that you've played, I guess, so that they can all appreciate where you've gone. But in your travels, you've been able to kind of see the contrast between here and there. And I think it's kind of helped you notice what's wrong You know what I'm saying? But in general, I'd like the audience to know where you've played.
Well, honestly, I've played all over. I've crossed this country, 2 or 3 times just in the last 2 years alone.
Yeah.
And so I'll play in the middle of cornfields, in the Midwest, or, in the harbor in Maine, or, New Hampshire, or, last year I got to do 5 shows with the Indigo Girls, which was beyond a dream. Even one of them was on my birthday even. It was ridiculous.
Nice.
And so, I've certainly gotten to see scenes all over the country and getting to know people all over the country. But I will be honest, everybody is struggling.
Yeah.
It's a struggle everywhere. I haven't found any specific community where live music is really thriving right now. I don't know if it's because people are still coming back from the pandemic years, but venues are still closing left and right. Audiences haven't really come back. Just having that broke up the culture of going out, going to a show, and
Sure.
and knowing that that's a special thing, and really, valuing that. So, I know that I was told by kind of a prominent manager a couple years before the pandemic that one of the shifts he had seen that had kind of weakened the scene was that people weren't necessarily getting season tickets anymore to performance arts venues. Like, so my antidote for the whole your music doesn't matter because really you're just selling booze thing was to try to pursue performance arts venues. And some more concert halls and that kind of thing. And I was told that culture used to be really cool because people would buy season tickets. They trusted the venues and the promoters, which are non-existent now. They trusted the promoters. Anything that got booked there would be of good quality.
Certain quality, yeah.
And so they would get season tickets and come to all the shows because it was just a built-in part of their social life, and they valued building community through that. And at some point that had shifted into people only paying for marquee artists that they had heard of. So you would use this system to make people famous, right? Mm-hmm. But then you had a generation of people who were famous, and they didn't use the system anymore for the up and comers. They would only book the famous people, and people would only pay for the tickets where the famous people were coming through.
Interesting.
And so that meant that the venue was then spending its whole budget on the marquee person, and no longer, spending smaller amounts of money on up and comers. They would just spend the whole budget on getting Taj Mahal in, or some big name like that. So that was the first pivot that happened that made it more difficult to break an artist. When it became more difficult to break an artist, then it also became more difficult for artists to secure management or an agent, which are key in breaking artists, because those tier in the kind of business structure noticed that they weren't making as much money, so they weren't taking on new clients. So now the venues aren't booking. Who
noticed that they weren't making the money and not taking on?
The managers and the agents.
Okay.
So the managers and the agents then started clawing for these marquee artists, mm-hmm. and everybody else, sorry, you missed out. So that was the first shift that happened that kind of put a chokehold on developing artists. And then the next tier was the financial crisis and then the pandemic, where the venues really struggling to keep their doors open. Yeah. All this consolidation with Live Nation and blah, 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 buying out mom and pop venues all over the country. And either shuttering them or getting involved with all the Ticketmaster stuff, and just making it impossible for the consumer to to, you know, even get tickets reasonably, like, so, and the newest development that I just think is outrageous. I just don't understand how any of this is conscionable, is that the venues are now taking, like the larger venues, are now taking 25% of merch sales.
Tell me about it.
And often merch sales are the only thing that keep you on the road. Like on one hand, you're recouping an expense because it's not cheap to make these albums and these T-shirts and stuff. It's not cheap.
Yeah.
So you want to recoup that
pay
expense,
that back, yeah.
but also you need cash flow on the road, and you're not getting it from the venue. You know, you got to get your cash flow somewhere. So you try to distribute that by giving the audience something of value that they might want to take home with them.
Yeah.
And the venue wants to take 25% of that.
Yeah, like, I really think that's despicable.
It's insane.
Yeah.
And I think we've gotten to the point where all of the revenue streams for independent artists are just under attack. All of them are under attack. So, you know, obviously music sales are, you know, exponentially lower than they were 10 years ago.
Sure.
Nobody has to pay for music anymore. You just stream it on Spotify. You pay $10 a month and you think that's going to get distributed to the artist, but it is not.
Right.
So, and then they keep choking that. So it used to be that you would get your little pennies, but now they won't even audit your little pennies unless you getting over a thousand spins a month. Right. And so that meant, you know, 99% of those tracks aren't getting their pennies anymore. Okay, great. So we know that there's been a huge drain on that end. So what do? Okay, let's do merch. You know, let's do some merch. You know, so like, you know, the prices, like when you used to be able to get a T-shirt for $2 a piece, now it's $7 a piece, $10 a piece. So there's all kinds of inflation on the merch end. You know, all the audiences are like, where's the vinyl? Where's the vinyl? Vinyl used to be $1 to $2 a unit to make and press. Now vinyl is, if you're doing short runs, $10 a unit to press. And the thing is, a lot of indie labels won't distribute vinyl because the retailers won't buy the vinyl from the labels because the retailers can't return any product that they don't sell.
Gotcha.
And it's got such a fundamental, like, high price point, you know, that, you know, it's just like, okay, the retailers aren't going to do it. So the only way to sell vinyl is on the road. So now you're traveling around with this heavy stuff in your van and you got all your instruments and all of that, and it's vulnerable and blah, blah, blah.
Sure.
And then the fan gets mad if the corner is bent. And I'm like, but they're $10 a unit. And if I want to give you vinyl, I have to spend a minimum of $2,000. And that's out front. You don't understand. Like, we have no profit margins whatsoever. And if you're
that's
the
why
leader,
all this stuff needs to be said, because it's got to be jammed into their minds some kind of a way.
Yeah.
Realize what it is they're truly looking at. What did you truly just experience?
Yep.
And it didn't all just happen on stage.
Right. Exactly. So we spent everything we had driving to get to you, because you're not going to come to us, because nobody leaves their neighborhood anymore. So we come to your neighborhood. You know, I've gone all the way to the West Coast, and I've had people, I'd be like, I'm going to get here at this time. I've got this amount of time. If you want to see me, this is where you can find me. Oh, well, I don't know if I have time to come see, but can you come to my, no, I can't, because I drove 37 hours to get here. The least you could do is drive the 20 minutes to get to where I'm going to be.
Yeah.
So we got that dynamic going on, this entitlement. I'm not leaving my neighborhood. Oh, that's on the other side of town. Why don't you do something on my side of town next time? Why don't you tell your venue to call my agent? You know, like, and I'll come to your house if you arrange it with my agent, you know. So we've got that. We pay everything. We've got to get to you. We had flat tires, we had da-da-da-da-da. We covered all of that because we're like, the show must go on. We're going to be where we said we were going to be, right? Then we got to put ourselves up, we got to pay for that too. Now, sometimes the venue will kick in. I won't lie about that. Sometimes the venue will kick in housing for one night, the night that you play. But what about all the nights it took to get there? And like, can you actually get gigs in every city that you want to sleep in? Usually not, especially this large country, like you got vast areas where there are no gigs to be found, right? So we're putting ourselves up in every night. And guess what? We still have rent at home. So we're paying rent at home, paying rent on the road. Double rent. This job requires double rent, right? Get it all worked out, get to the show, have our, 90 minutes of ecstasy playing. Now, we spend an hour setting up. We're going to spend an hour breaking down. Then we got to load all the stuff in the hotel or the Airbnb so your stuff don't get stolen. Because guess what? Everybody likes to steal your stuff. They will just chop your trailer straight. If you're doing a trailer, they'll chop it right off. They'll just chop that lock right off. Your stuff is gone. Now you're on the road. You got to get to the next show, and you got to somehow raise $4,000 to get enough gear to give the next show. This is real, Yeah, and you give the next show. You go, you do it overnight, night after night. Blah. Then you get back home. You're worn out, you're tired, you're spent, you got, you burnt out, you got nothing left in you. And now somehow you're supposed to do all the administrative stuff directed, towards pulling off the next tour leg. Yeah. And this is a rinse and repeat thing. And if you don't want to do all the administrative stuff, then you pay somebody to do that for you. Now you got somebody else on payroll. Like, the overhead is astronomical. And the income streams are being choked at every turn. Yeah. So there's a point at which something has to give. And the only people who you will see out there now, it's getting to the point where the only people you'll see out there are the people who are independently wealthy and aren't doing this like because of blood, sweat, tears, care for humanity, trying to save the world. They're doing it for vanity. So you get vanity quality music. And if you get enough of that, then you won't know the difference anymore.
Sure. The Happy Meal. Well, tell everybody where they can find your music.
And on that note. Yes.
You mindless fucks. Go here, do this. No, this part is for the true lovers of music.
Tell us what? What do you want me to tell them?
Where they can find your music, where some of your shows are. Where's the experience of you? Well,
the Lilli Lewis experience at this time is kind of on hiatus. I will be playing Jazz Fest this year and a few shows around it. And other than that, I'm taking a year off. I actually, let's see, another thing I didn't talk about, how many of us musicians are uninsured, underinsured, sure. And we're, the lifestyle is hard. We're killing ourselves. And I actually am experiencing end-stage kidney failure and have to take some time off. I'll be off the road for probably at least another year. Mm-hmm. But if you want to find my music, that's easy to find because I'm on all the platforms, Amazon, iTunes, Spotify, yada, yada, yada. You throw a rock, you can find me. If you want to make sure I get paid for my music, you can find me on Bandcamp. And that's Folk Rock Diva, one word, .bandcamp.com. And you can also learn more about me on the Righteous Babe Records website. That's Ani DeFranco's label. It's an old hero of mine, and it's kind of remarkable that 20 years after doing this, our paths crossed, and I'm being represented by her outfit right now. So that's righteousbabe.com. Yeah, and of course, lillilewis.com. Is always a good place to find me. But I do have a weird name spelling, so just be careful about that.
Lilli.
Correct.
Lewis.
That is it.
All right.
Right.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Appreciate you.
Yeah.